Hearing come to order. The subcommittee chairman will be here in a moment, but one of the few great prerogatives of the chair is I also have the ability to bring it back to order. Thank you for staying over the break, and we will the voting break, and you'll see members straggling back in shortly. I have a short series of questions for you, and they really have to do with the work that the RAT Board has been doing. As far as we can tell, and both myself, the former chairman, and the current ranking member have all gone over, reviewed it, seen some of the discoveries, but particularly seen what we see as the first time in which there has been a direct outreach to get reporting, to get it in a format that is consistent and usable, and then use it against other databases to detect fraud. At the current time, OMB, from what we can tell, has no comprehensive plan to bring a similar recipient reporting system across the government. Can you comment on that?
Yes. First of all, I would say that we are completely committed to carrying forward some of the important accomplishments that the Recovery Board has had. One of the major areas where they've been successful, as you've noted, is the deployment of a forensic data tool and a fraud detection tool. It's for that reason that the President's budget includes a proposal to move into the Department of Treasury.
You're talking about the $10 million?
The $10 million for the Do Not Pay solution, which would adopt very similar approaches that the Recovery Board has adopted in terms of having a central place where the Treasury Department, in this case, would be assisting agencies in looking across all data sources where we can get access to both.
Well, and that's where I want to stop you.
Please.
The President, by executive order, could require all the agencies, I've been told at least, to cooperate in a way in which the reporting would be assumed, and thus that $10 million investment would be able to guarantee that it would have access subject to data integrity and ability to transmit it to do the kind of work the RAT Board's done. As you know, the RAT Board leveraged basically Katrina Rita data. They leveraged existing one-time events in order to get more access. They've been unable, except anecdotally by transfers that they've been able to get, they've been unable to get the real access that would allow cross-platform, and Treasury certainly would have the authority and the confidence. Are you prepared to, either legislatively or through executive action, get that kind of buy-in, or will it be, with all due respect, the old mealy-mouth, we're OMB, we do things collegially, we get buy-in, which is crap. It never works. And if you say it does, I'll have Mitch Daniels sitting in your seat explaining that it doesn't work before you know, by Sunday morning. That's my question to you, because your teeth are not sharp enough to cut through bureaucracy. Are you asking for something that would give either you and or, in this case, Treasury, the teeth to make this a reality?
I think the answer to that is yes. I mean, we have to balance the, as we break down data silos that exist in government today and enable us to do the type of analytics that are going to drive more powerful assessments around finding anomalies, fraud, and error. There will be other public policy balances that need to come into place, including, for example, privacy and other implications and data security. It's my position that we can achieve a far greater efficiency and streamlining of data share and data interoperability across Federal agencies while still meeting important privacy and security objectives. So it can be done.
What data does the Federal Government have which you're prohibited from accessing for purposes of analysis?
For purposes of, well, there are, for example, one of the more protected databases, the IRS database, is an example. And to the extent there's personally identifiable information or tax information, Section 6103 of the Code would prevent that type of movement of data. Another great example is the National Directory of New Hires.
Right, but let's go through because the IRS is the best known by the American people. The IRS routinely takes information in, digests it, and responds to State laws, Federal and State laws. If you have a deadbeat dad in Minnesota who leaves and goes to Florida or any other State, the Minnesota input data leads to an output data that confirms the availability of the dollars, allows for the grabbing of the tax return, and thus the movement of it either to public entities that have taken care of the mother and child, or to directly to the individual, or for that matter, even to a state coffer on a state tax. So if you have that authority within the code, can't you, without looking at it, create a leverage where you send the data in a format the IRS can absorb with your request, and you get back only the limited response? Isn't it true that you can't even pierce the IRS as long as you don't extract the data?
Yeah, there are. I am personally aware of situations in which IRS data transfers can occur in a different format in order to protect certain 6103 restrictions. So you're right about that. Okay, my time has expired. When you said yes, you're prepared to do it.
I can yield to the gentleman an additional 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman, but I'll hopefully not use it all. You didn't say that you would ask the President by executive order. You apparently, historically, do not have the legislative authority. Are you going to come to us for legislative authority, and if so, when?
I think, let me step back and say that there are different avenues we can take to break down these data silos. In some case, administrative. In some case, we would need legislation. I believe we are, as we move forward on our efforts to detect fraud and understand more what we need to do to knock down these data silos, I think we will be back and asking you for help, legislative help, to create these types of data transfers. I don't have a date certain by which I know we will come back, but it's our commitment to work with this committee in particular on these issues.
Okay, and my closing question, which I'd appreciate, just answer it for the record or briefly respond and then expand. Forensics clearly are not going to be enough alone. If I were Visa, MasterCard, or any of the other, if you will, world-class organizations, real-time online assessment is how you prevent the loss, not how you simply see if the courts are too backed up to go after the person once you find them. $10 million is obviously not for that. Do you have a plan to make any portion of the government as proactive as Visa, MasterCard?
I don't know that I could articulate for you an overarching plan. I will say that I agree with the principle that prevention comes first versus paying and chasing errors after they occur. Absolutely. There are situations that are emerging today where agencies are taking more aggressive steps to pause, to review, to place moratoriums on certain payments before they go out the door. That's part of the prevention. But a global cross-government plan that initiates the type of neural networks that you're talking about, we don't have that in place yet. I think if we get to a point where we start to knock down some of these data silos, that will open the door. We need to bring some smart people around the table to figure out how to enable leveraging such a new data environment.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. And I would like to recognize the Ranking Member, Mr. Cummings, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Werfel, let me ask you this. In the other panel, Ellen Miller talked about some agencies that were not reporting. Were you here? Did you?
I was.
Can you talk about that for a moment? And I was just wondering what we're doing to try to make sure that they do report.
Thank you for the opportunity to respond to those issues. First of all, I think it's a very important thing that the Sunlight Foundation is doing by raising these issues to our attention. It's part of transparency at work. We don't just self-identify errors. We rely on the public to be reviewing our reports and finding those issues as well. And I think in some cases, we're going to find that the public's going to report, like a group like Sunlight Foundation, on an error, and it's going to have a real immediate impact and be a legitimate issue for us to address. And sometimes the error has an easy explanation, and it's not really an error at all. And I think there was an example that was provided around the school lunch program where USA Spending doesn't require us to report payments under $25,000, which is the bulk of the school lunch payments, and that's why there's an absence of information. All that said, there are criticisms that were discussed in the first panel that are valid. and we're not where we need to be in terms of the full completeness of the data. We have issued a policy at OMB that we think is having an impact on this, that requires Federal agencies to initiate more robust quality assurance programs around the completeness, accuracy, and timeliness of their data, starting with a senior accountable official and moving forward to the types of frameworks we see in our traditional financial statement reporting process: risk management, internal control review, reconciliation of information in our accounting systems to what's being reported on usaspending.gov. All of that is underway. But, Congressman, it's an evolving process, and as we move forward, there will continue to be points in time where we expect there will be some errors, and we will get better and better at this as we go.
I often say that there are certain things that are a project and not a product. Certain things are ever evolving. And the question is, are we moving fast enough? We just heard from the Commissioner of the SEC yesterday, and in one of her reports, she talked about how folk on Wall Street were moving so fast and coming up with all kinds of new products, and in some instances, so fast it was hard for SEC to keep up with them. And I'm just wondering, do we have, first of all, the technology that we need? Is it, from what you can see, problems stemming from folks who are just not doing what they are supposed to do? Is there a bigger hammer that needs to be hammered? I'm just wondering.
I think it's a mixture. I'd say that there are moments that I see in my work where it's almost astonishing the progress that's being made. So, for example, I look at recovery.gov today as an example. The information that's there, the level of detail, the functionality of that website, and I think that is really a cutting-edge tool that is probably far ahead of where I thought we might be 5 years ago if I was testifying before you then. And so that's exciting, and that, I think, rallies the rest of the community around what is possible, and really opens the door to even greater efforts. At the same time, there are agencies that I could probably say I would have thought would have been further along if I was testifying here 5 years ago. To answer your question, I think a bigger hammer is needed. I think what you have today is a dichotomy that was reported on the first panel that's accurate. We have what I would argue is a very robust financial statement audit process that exists today. It started in 1990. It's been 20 years. We have 20 of the 24 major agencies in government receiving a clean audit opinion. A lot of effort goes into scrutinizing to the 10th decimal point the numbers that go on our balance sheets and our other basic financial statements. And we've developed a very robust process in response that's moving forward and achieving important things in terms of financial reporting reliability. That robustness does not exist with respect to the information as reported on usaspending.gov. The spend information, as we call it, is not completely wired into the financial statement audit process. We think that we need to look at that audit process and that reporting model to potentially realign some of that audit scrutiny around spending information. I think you'd see a difference in results if agencies felt the accountability of an auditor's eye on these issues.
I ask for unanimous consent that I have the additional 3 minutes as the Chairman had.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. In your testimony, you also talk about the breadth and depth of reporting required by the Recovery Act. 200,000 prime and subrecipients file public quarterly reports with up to 99 distinct data fields. As you point out, this is more frequent than other major financial reporting required by the Federal Government, and yet recovery.gov seems to be the best example of Federal spending transparency. Indeed, 99.6% of prime recipients filed on time last quarter. So I have to ask you this. Where did recovery.gov succeed and usaspending.gov struggle, and why?
It's a very good question. I think, for one, the Recovery Act represented a point in time where there was tremendous accountability, both vertically and horizontally across government and recipients, about getting the information reported in and getting it correct. There was leadership engagement, congressional oversight. GAO has probably issued 20 reports auditing and looking at our activities to meet these requirements. There was a real sense, and I'm glad of it, a real healthy stress that was placed on the entire federal environment and the recipients of the Recovery Act that this needed to be done transparently. And it became one of the most major priorities that I've ever been involved in order to make this work, make it successful. And we had a very talented individual in Earl Devaney at the board, at the Recovery Board, helping us along the way. And the stars aligned for great success. The USA spending environment, it hasn't been as similar. The law was passed in 2006. You did not see the same type of emphasis, whether it be GAO, congressional, or administration leadership, around getting those data requirements up and running. And when this administration came in, it was confronted almost immediately with the economic situation and the Recovery Act. We immediately looked at this as a major opportunity to deploy Recovery Act reporting in recovery.gov successfully and have it set the milestone that USA spending would need to follow. And we already see evidence that that's following true, because up until the Recovery Act, we never had any sub-award reporting in USA spending, and now we do. So we're already starting to see that this arc of can Recovery Act reporting set a new tone and a new watermark that would move USA spending in the right direction. It's already starting to materialize, but we still have to work at it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize the ranking member of this subcommittee, Mr. Connolly, for his questions in 5 minutes.
I thank the Chairman and welcome Mr. Werfel. Welcome back to the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. You're a second home lately.
Yes.
We're glad to have you. And you, I don't think, had joined us yet, but the Chairman, Mr. Langford, and I, in our respective opening statements, both praised the administration for the transparency initiative, especially with respect to recovery.gov. So I think there was public acknowledgement on a bipartisan basis that we've made a lot of progress. Now, nothing's perfect. You, in your testimony, talked about the OMB and the CFO Council developing a new statement of spending to focus on how and where federal dollars are being spent. Would that supplant the current CFS, and how would that work?
It wouldn't supplant it. It gets back to part of the response to Congressman Cummings' question. How do you, we confronted ourselves the following question: how do we drive more accountability for federal agencies reporting of spending information into USA spending? And we feel like we've developed a pretty strong muscle in the area of basic financial statement reporting. The agencies have been doing it for years. They've set up IT systems and processes to do it. And so the question is, how do we walk in that game and talk in that dialogue? And that's where the concept of the statement of spending came, because agencies have the ability and the experience, and auditors have the ability and experience to audit basic financial statements. And we felt that if we can create a financial statement similar to our other statements that has the foundational information that goes into usaspending.gov, that you, in order to get a clean audit opinion on that statement of spend, it would automatically mean that the underlying source information is accurate, and then the information that flowed into usaspending.gov by definition, therefore, would be more reliable. So what we're saying with the statement of spend is that is our suggestive strategy for how to integrate the reliability of USA spending information into what we believe has been a successful yet still emerging initiative to improve basic financial reporting on things like balance sheets.
Are there best practices from usaspending.gov that can be applied to other federal agencies? And if so, how does OMB disseminate that or inculcate that?
Absolutely. One of the things that we did when we started this process of moving forward on a more robust quality assurance program from USA Spending, is we asked each agency to submit a data quality plan. And you can look across those plans and see some agencies really ahead of the game in terms of the types of reconciliations that they're doing, looking at control totals, doing automated reports right out of their systems. I think Danny Harris, Dr. Harris, did a very good job during his testimony of explaining how much they've leveraged their transaction infrastructure in a way to make this make more sense. But other agencies, not as much. Other agencies are still doing more manual, what we sometimes call cuff reports, putting together the reports separately, and therefore it's not as efficient and is not as reliable. So one of the basic missions of my office, the CFO Council, is to share this information across agencies, and we have working groups that are doing that to say, here's what Dr. Harris and the Department of Education are doing. They have it wired into a process that's working for them and minimizing errors, and your agency is not doing as well of a job. And so how can we close that gap? And so that's part of the mission here.
Let me ask you, because I'm going to run out of time, one more question. In the category of transparency, at least speaking for this member, I don't think we pay enough attention up here to tax expenditures. That's a real live spending item by any other name. We just don't like to talk about it, but it's $1 trillion a year. What is OMB doing to try to make sure that we're shedding more light on tax expenditures and their relationship to the Federal deficit and their relationship to other aspects of Federal spending?
Now, this is an issue that I think it's going to be one of those times in the hearing where I ask to come back to you with more information. I'd like to consult with my colleagues at IRS. It's not currently one of the required elements, for example, within Recovery Act reporting and USA Spending. And so sometimes we're so busy dealing with the statutory requirements that are before us and meeting all those deadlines that some of the other elements of transparency don't get on our radar screen as much. And for me, that's true. My days and nights are spent meeting the requirements of the various laws before me. So let me, if I could, consult with IRS and then come back and brief your subcommittee on this issue.
I yield to the gentleman additional 3 minutes of time.
I thank the Chairman, and I really welcome that. And, Mr. Chairman, I would hope that our subcommittee would welcome that, because I think this is if we're going to have transparency and we're going to have data available to the public, tax expenditures, if you look at how they're accounted and how we address them in budget documents and so forth, it's woefully inadequate. And it is a very substantial amount of opportunity cost from a revenue point of view. And it may be all good policy, but it deserves the light of day. And so I would welcome your coming back to us in much more detail. And let me ask that, and I would hope that the Chairman would join me in this, that we would ask also for your recommendations about how better to capture both the value and the cost of such expenditures moving forward. And, Mr. Chairman, I'd ask whether you might be able to join me in that request.
Yeah, that's a difficult one to track just because the IRS code's 9 times longer than the Bible. You think we have a few exceptions in there?
Exactly.
Gathering all of that and what the value is included, I'm sure would be quite a task on that. I don't know whether that GAO or who that might be to be able to land on and try to help us determine those things.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And my final point question would be, I assume that both the CTO and the CIO, Mr. Chopra and Mr. Kundra, are involved in the deployment of technology with your CFO council in trying to, A, disseminate best practices, eliminate duplication, and improve transparency.
Absolutely. It's a partnership. It's, Vivek Kundra, the government CIO, could have been sitting here today just as I am. With the emphasis of this hearing on reliability of reporting, potential issues of audit. It just made more sense for me to be here, but we're attached at the hip on these issues, and we have to solve this with a multidisciplinary approach. It's just the auditor, just the accountant, not going to get it done. The technologist is critical to this effort as well.
I think that's a really important point, Mr. Chairman. And with that, I yield back my time, and I thank the Chair for his generosity and consideration.
Thank you. Mr. Ruffle, let me just run through a litany of questions here and just short answers and try to run through a couple of things on it as we try to finish this out. And thank you for waiting through the lunch hour to be able to be here as well as we're finishing up the vote on it. You had mentioned earlier that there was a need for some legislation to correct some of the data needs that are out there. I'd like for your office to be able to provide to our committee that list that you would say, here are the legislative fixes that we need to be able to help resolve those things. If you could get that back to us, we'll make sure that we share that bipartisan way, and that would be very helpful to us. There are a maze of sites that are out there. Recovery.gov was very well done. It got the information out quickly. It was so successful that now we have multiplied the .gov, and now we have recovery.gov and paymentaccountabillyaccuracy.gov and itdashboard.gov, and all the agencies have it, research.gov, data.gov, and it goes on and on. I'm missing many that I know. How does an individual go find their information now? We've moved from it's out there, go search for it, when originally the design was let's lock into data.gov, usaspending.gov, and say if you're looking for something, go there. Is that still the mission? If so, how is it going?
You're raising an enormously challenging element of open government and transparency, and there are many challenging elements to it. One of them is getting the data out there.
Correct.
And we're trying, and I think making important progress in getting more raw information and other types of reports public, in particular through the web. Another challenge, and there are numerous, but the other challenge is sometimes the quantity of the data that's out there can be overwhelming, and how are we assisting the citizenry in accessing that information? And right now, I think you've hit on something that is part of a strategy. It might not be the most effective strategy, and it's evolving, but it's the branding of our websites in ways that make sense. If you want to learn about grants, go to grants.gov. If you want to learn about where federal dollars are going, usaspending.gov. If you're curious about the Recovery Act, recovery.gov. And you see the theme of trying to make it logical. And we do a lot of work with citizens and user groups around these efforts to say what works for you. We don't do these websites in a vacuum.
Correct, but what is the central portal going to be? If I don't know which one to go to, where do I go? To say, this is where I start.
Yeah, and I don't think that we have established a consistent central portal. I know that in the previous administration there was FirstGov, there's USA.gov is available, but I don't think that we've championed the starting point portal for the rest of government, but it's something that
let me just say, let me ask you, and obviously I'm not going to order you on this one or the other on it, but let me ask you to examine that. Because people outside of the Beltway do not know where to go. They do not know if they're looking for food stamp information to go to the Agriculture Department. They're not aware that there are education programs in the Department of Defense. They don't know how to be able to search for those things. So they need a central portal to go be able to ask the questions, and if they're going to get the data, and then it can take them to the spot that's going to go. It doesn't have to be all in one place. It can be these various sites. That does make sense. There are going to be some watchdog groups. They're always going to land on research.gov. That's what they research. That's what they want to go after, or the grants.gov. But there has to be a place for people to be able to go to if the information is out there that they know. Otherwise, many of the things that we talked about earlier with Dr. Harris and others, it's on their agency website. It's not on data.gov. It's not on usaspending.gov. It's over on their agency. So I can't go find it.
So, yes, let me just recommit to the point that we are working towards that objective. That we have, as you mentioned, some success with the branding in terms of certain stakeholders who automatically know where to go, and we develop important partnerships with them, and that efforts are underway to reconcile the various .govs. What I'd like to do is, as you say, come back. We'll show you some of our thoughts on a strategic vision for that, and then let's partner together towards the right strategic vision.
Let me bounce a couple other things past you. There is a great need we heard from agriculture and education that some data standards. If things are going to go up, Here's how they need to go up. And I gave the example earlier of an address field that include the entire address, including state, city, zip code, in one field. That's obviously not searchable. A single entity that is a contractor needs to have an ID number that someone can search for that contractor and they can chase them down. There is a need from OMB to be able to provide back to the agencies, here are more data standards, even begging the question, what is a significant piece of data out there? And for instance on that, if someone is going and looking for how many employees does an agency have, what is their budget, what are the programs that they are doing, and what's the mission of those programs, there is no place they can go to get that. They're stuck searching through an agency website that may or may not have that. That seems to be fairly usable data that I think most American taxpayers would want to be able to look at a site like a data.gov, like something, whatever it may be, and to say how many people work there, what's the mission of the departments that are there, what are even the names of the departments that are there, and what's the budget for that, to find an established piece on that. If that is something the OMB can begin on, that is something I think we should begin on as well, to say there's a basic transparency piece that needs to get out there. Does that seem reasonable to you?
It absolutely does. I think if you looked at the landscape of data across government, you're going to obviously find significant heterogeneity and opportunities for standardization. You'll see some pockets of standardization that are promising, sure, and that we can build upon. But what you'll also find is a lot of work to be done.
Sure.
And we need to move out on a strategic set of priorities. We've started. So, for example,
no, and I tell you, Ranking Member Connolly and I have both affirmed that.
Yeah.
This is the first administration to do this level of it. This is the beginning point. We understand. The criticism is not that we're starting it. Way to go on starting it and getting it out there. I want to find out what are the lessons learned, what are we missing, and what are people asking for. And let me give you a for instance on it. It would be a help to this committee that when the emails come back as feedback, and there are several of your sites that say for feedback or contact us for more questions, what data are you looking for basically, if our committee were to get those things in real time at the same time. Not that we're going to respond to those things, but that would allow us in our oversight role to be able to say, you know what, these are the data pieces people are asking for. And if our committee could get that unfiltered and it could be shared bipartisan, then people could get a chance to say, you know what, a lot of people seem to be asking for this. Why is it that we don't provide that? That would allow us to be able to do our oversight a lot stronger. And let me make another comment to you. You mentioned the recovery.gov. That is a very successful site. You're right, it was very well done, and the information was unprecedented that was put out. My feeling on it is one of the successes of it was the recipients were uploading information. It wasn't just a government entity that was putting that down there. They've got lots of other things, but the recipients were saying, yes, we received this, this is what we received, and this is the feedback for it. That is of great benefit. Is that something that's going to continue, and can that be replicated in USA spending in other places?
Yeah, and there are many, I mean, a lot of the information that the Federal Government reports today, the source is the recipient of the Federal dollars, reporting whether they're reporting what's going on with the dollars from a financial perspective or performance perspective. What was, I think, unique about the Recovery Act was the automated nature of it, the speed of it.
Correct.
All of that.
That is a platform that now exists, though. What I'm asking is that a platform that will continue to be used? Will it be replicated in other areas to say the recipient can quickly say, yes, we've received this grant, and also be able to come back and say, this is what was done with it? Because one of the primary questions that I get a lot about grants and contracts and other things, was it actually accomplished? Did we do it? What happened with that? And I think there would be people that could look around their own neighborhood and could find, this is what happened in my area. I had no idea that the Federal Government was involved in this area in positive ways. But they don't know unless there's some reporting back on accountability on that. So that recovery.gov platform of recipient reporting, is that something that's going to be multiplied out and used?
It is, and it's ongoing today. And we have more and more modernized and more seamless ways of collecting information from non-federal stakeholders, and that's going on today.
In the USA spending and other places, and has been referenced by several people, when there are gaps in it and information is not showing up, or it's showing up that the contract is here or the grant is here, but just a zero amount, how are they held to account in the agencies to get that information correctly, whether it be a data field is not done or the dollar amounts are completely left out? Is there a chain of command? Is there someone verifying that and saying, hey, we've got to get this correct? It seems that 30-some-odd% accuracy rate's not quite high enough for us.
A couple of responses there. First, as mentioned earlier in my testimony and mentioned on the first panel, right now the process is a self-assessment. We've asked the agencies to create a senior accountable official and then an internal process to validate completeness and accuracy. And there are some limitations in the self-assessment. An independent eye, whether it's the Inspector General or an auditor coming in to review that, is going to drive improvements and more objectivity, and the results will improve. Secondly, I want to just, on the record, take a different perspective on the 30% success rate that was in the testimony of one of the other witnesses from the Sunlight Foundation. We have concerns with the methodology surrounding that, and I don't need to go into great detail, but we do not believe the success rate is as low as the Sunlight Foundation.
Well, it's just the key data coming out. I did a quick search on just for Oklahoma, my home state, and to be able to look at it and see some of the things that are in USAID spending and tracking through the different things that are there. There is just for instance, in last year, there were a helicopter services contract that was put out, but there's no amount that's listed on that one. So we don't know what that one is. But there is a peanut butter, apparently, contract that was done for a little over $2 million. Now, that seems like a large amount of peanut butter. We go through a lot of it at my house. But in this particular report, and I could go on and on, there are multiple areas that are zeroed out, and page after page, there are about 17 pages listed. A lot of zeros that are listed here, and I don't know if we bought $2 million worth of peanut butter in Oklahoma or not from a government contract, but there just seems to be some issues that I could look at and I could say, okay, somebody needs to be verifying this data and making sure it's complete, and there needs to be a process. It's a very good thing to get the data out there, but to get it out wrong or incomplete raises all sorts of questions.
Absolutely. And as I think was evidenced during the first panel, some of the criticisms or concerns about the data have rational explanations, and some of them it's just a basic data quality issue that we need to address. I think the more people that are searching this data and using this data, the more we move in the direction of better quality. The fact that you can go online and find that $2 million of Federal dollars were spent on something related to peanut butter is something that could not have been done.
That's correct.
Before. And for that, we want to celebrate that, leverage it, make sure that we do have a more accountable government. But as you point out, there are gaps in the reporting, and we're working on closing them.
That is the best gift that we can give, is transparency. Watchdog groups, outside citizens groups, the contractors themselves being able to look back on the site and say, was it reported correctly, is that accurate, is a tremendous asset to them. And we want to continue to multiply that and make sure that that does occur. So with that, Mr. Connolly, did you have additional questions that you want to add?
If the Chairman would yield, I was just going to actually add to your point that it may be a good thing to celebrate the fact that we can now solve the peanut butter mystery. But on the other hand, we may want more information. And I would, because it's not intuitively obvious to the searcher why we would be spending $2 million tax dollars on peanut butter. And so while we're celebrating the fact that one can access that piece of data, I would hope that, to the Chairman's point, that we try to make these search engines even more useful by way of, and here's why we're buying $2 million worth of peanut butter.
Right. And as an example, if I could respond to that, a legitimate explanation might be part of the school lunch program, and therefore it's there's an easy explanation.
Completely agree, and I would say that the ranking member mentioned in his opening statement that there's not a need to be able to track every paper clip. That's not what I think the American people are looking for on it. But I think it is these broad categories to know that it's consistent. We know what that is. The information is getting out there. It's trackable. It's traceable. For instance, if a report is done, people want to know if there was a report done on wildfires and this certain bird nest was done. It asks the obvious question, how much did that cost to do that report? Well, we know there was a grant that was given to be able to do that. We should be attaching that report to the cost of producing that report so everyone could know and evaluate, is that good use of taxpayer dollars, and then start the conversation. That is a good thing for us as legislators to be able to look at and be able to see, and for people in our districts to hold us to account on that. That's a good thing for us to hold you to account, to say we need that information to get out there. If a report's done, how much does it cost? Can they find it and be able to track it is a reasonable thing. If there are no additional questions on it, Mr. Werfel, thank you very much for being here. We have a great deal to do. We look forward to your follow-up reports on it, and this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks, James.
And if so, when?
I think, let me step back and say that there are different avenues we can take to break down these data silos. In some case administrative, in some case we would need legislation. I believe we are, as we move forward on our efforts to detect fraud and understand more what we need to do to knock down these data silos, I think we will be back and asking you for help, legislative help, to create these types of data transfers. I don't have a date certain by which I know we will come back, but it's our commitment to work with this committee in particular on these issues.
Okay. And my closing question, which I'd appreciate, just answer it for the record or briefly respond and then expand. Forensics clearly are not going to be enough alone. If I were Visa, MasterCard, or any of the other, if you will, world-class organizations, real-time online assessment is how you prevent the loss, not how you simply see if the courts are too backed up to go after the person once you find them. $10 million is obviously not for that. Do you have a plan to make any portion of the government as proactive as Visa, MasterCard?
I don't know that I could articulate for you an overarching plan. I will say that I agree with the principle that prevention comes first versus paying and chasing errors after they occur. Absolutely. There are situations that are emerging today where agencies are taking more aggressive steps to pause.
Digest it and responds to State laws, Federal and State laws. If you have a deadbeat dad in Minnesota who leaves and goes to Florida or any other state, the Minnesota input data leads to an output data that confirms the availability of the dollars, allows for the grabbing of the tax return, and thus the movement of it either to public entities that have taken care of the mother and child, or to directly to the individual, or for that matter, even to a State coffer on a State tax. So if you have that authority within the code, can't you, without looking at it, create a leverage where you send the data in a format the IRS can absorb with your request, and you get back only the limited response? Isn't it true that you can't even pierce the IRS as long as you don't extract the data?
Yeah, there are. I am personally aware of situations in which IRS data transfers can occur in a different format in order to protect certain 6103 restrictions. So you're right about that.
Okay, my time has expired. When you said yes, you're prepared to do it,
I can yield to the gentleman an additional 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman, but I'll hopefully not use it all. You didn't say that you would ask the President by executive order. You apparently, historically, do not have the legislative authority. Are you going to come to us for legislative authority?
Proposal to move into the Department of Treasury.
You're talking about the $10 million.
The $10 million for the do not pay solution, which would adopt very similar approaches that the Recovery Board has adopted in terms of having a central place where the Treasury Department, in this case, would be assisting agencies in looking across all data sources where we can get access to both.
Well, and that's where I want to stop you.
Please.
The President, by executive order, could require all the agencies, I've been told at least, to cooperate in a way in which the reporting would be assumed, and thus that $10 million investment would be able to guarantee that it would have access, subject to data integrity and ability to transmit it, to do the kind of work the RAT Board's done. As you know, the RAT Board leveraged basically Katrina Rita data. They leveraged existing one-time events in order to get more access. They've been unable, except anecdotally by transfers that they've been able to get, they've been unable to get the real access that would allow cross-platform, and Treasury certainly would have the authority and the confidence. Are you prepared to, either legislatively or through executive action, get that kind of buy-in, or will it be, with all due respect, the old mealy-mouth, we're OMB, we do things collegially, we get buy-in, which is crap. It never works. And if you say it does, I'll have Mitch Daniels sit. Hearing come to order. The subcommittee chairman will be here in a moment, but one of the few great prerogatives of the chair is I also have the ability to bring it back to order. Thank you for staying over the break, and we will the voting break, and you'll see members straggling back in shortly. I have a short series of questions for you, and they really have to do with the work that the RAT Board has been doing. As far as we can tell, and both myself, the former chairman, and the current ranking member have all gone over, reviewed it, seen some of the discoveries, but particularly seen what we see as the first time in which there's been a direct outreach to get reporting, to get it in a format that is consistent and usable, and then use it against other databases to detect fraud. At the current time, OMB, from what we can tell, has no comprehensive plan to bring a similar recipient reporting system across the government. Can you comment on that?
Yes. First of all, I would say that we are completely committed to carrying forward some of the important accomplishments that the Recovery Board has had. One of the major areas where they've been successful, as you've noted, is the deployment of a forensic data tool and a fraud detection tool. It's for that reason that the President's budget includes a
in your seat explaining that it doesn't work before by Sunday morning. That's my question to you, because your teeth are not sharp enough to cut through bureaucracy. Are you asking for something that would give either you and or, in this case, Treasury, the teeth to make this a reality?
I think the answer to that is yes. I mean, we have to balance as we break down data silos that exist in government today and enable us to do the type of analytics that are going to drive more powerful assessments around finding anomalies, fraud, and error. There will be other public policy balances that need to come into place, including, for example, privacy and other implications and data security. It's my position that we can achieve a far greater efficiency and streamlining of data share and data interoperability across Federal agencies while still meeting important privacy and security objectives. So it can be done.
What data does the Federal Government have which you're prohibited from accessing for purposes of analysis?
For purposes of, well, there are, for example, one of the more protected databases, the IRS database, is an example. And to the extent there's personally identifiable information or tax information, Section 6103 of the Code would prevent that type of movement of data. Another great example is the National Directory of New Hires.
Right, but let's go through because the IRS is the best known by the American people. The IRS routinely takes information in